Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Throughout the world, Allah sent prophets. According to the numbers given to us, there were 124,000 different prophets sent throughout the world, and each of them came to teach the reality of God, the reality of creation, Haq, God's reality. And men listened, and even though all of these different 124,000 prophets spoke about God and man's interrelationship with God, what happened was somehow men formed a relationship with the prophets that brought them the messages, as opposed to forming a relationship directly with God. And because of these relationships that were formed with the prophets, men formed religions that were different than each other because of the fact that the prophets, at least physically, were different from each other. So they took on characteristics that had to do with the prophets. Some of them believed that in order to find salvation, you had to dress like the prophets dressed, or their prophet dressed. You had to grow a beard like their prophet grew a beard. You had to grow your hair like their prophet grew their hair. And a big part of worship became imitation of the prophets, became imitation of the way prophets did things. I have a story that I witnessed with my Sheikh, Muhammad Rahim Bawa Muhaiyaddeen, that I may have told before, but it's incredibly important for this point. Bawa was in the meeting room giving a talk, and a young man stood up, and he was wearing a t-shirt. And in those days, Bawa usually, when he spoke, wore a sarong, a t-shirt, and a turban. And the young man stood up and said, when Bawa asked for questions, and said, "I don't have a question, but I want to tell you, I love you very much, Bawa. And because I love you very much, I'm wearing a t-shirt just like yours. And I'm also going to get a sarong just like yours. And I'm going to grow a beard just like yours. And I'm going to get a turban to wear just like yours." And Bawa looked at him and shook his head and said, "Okay, but you also have to pull this tooth." And he put his finger in his mouth and pointed to one of his teeth and said, "Until you also have to pull that tooth if you want to be like me." And that was all the explanation that he gave. Now, imagine if this young man started a religion. In this religion, everybody would be wearing t-shirts and sarongs and turbans and pulling that tooth without even knowing why they were pulling the tooth or wearing a turban or had a t-shirt on. But if you didn't do that, you weren't conforming to reality. I remembered seeing this, and about 10 years after this happened, I was sitting in front of Bawa in his room, and I said, "Bawa, a long time ago, so-and-so happened. And the young man said he was going to wear a turban like yours and a t-shirt like yours and a sarong like yours, grow a beard like yours. And you told him to pull a tooth, but you didn't give any explanation. Why do you need to pull that tooth? And Bawa said to me that this is the tooth that is connected to the lower self, the nefs. And unless that's pulled out, you can't be like me. Well, there you are. It is not about externalities. It's not about what's on the outside. It's about what's on the inside. And what's happened with religion is it's become an external display of ritual. And ritual has become religion. And prayer that has limitations, you start at 9, you end at 9:30, or you start at 12 and you end at 12:15, has become the mode of prayer. You separate yourself by time for a period of time to do some prayer, and then you go back to your business. If you do all of these things, you are considered one who has completed their requirements for the religion. Recently, I saw a documentary on the Amish and about people who had left the fold. And the ones who had left the fold were doing the documentary. And to make it short, they were showing how everything that these people did was based on certain rules and regulations, and the following of these rules and regulations. That the following to the letter of the rules and regulations became much more important than almost anything else. And they said, you may wonder how they can maintain a society with this strict following of the rules and regulations, and how they can maintain people doing it. And these people who had left the fold said at the end of the documentary that shunning was the methodology that they kept everybody in line with. And shunning means that if you don't follow the rules and the hierarchy determines that you don't follow the rules, they will not speak to you, they will not eat with you, they will not allow you in the community, and you're shunned, you're pushed out of the community. And since this is all these people know, because they've been raised in it, the fear of being pushed out of the community keeps them into adherence to all of these rules and regulations, many of which seem, to the outside at least, absurd. Now, in America, we have a pretty open society. But as you all know, in parts of the world, there are heresy laws. If you say something that's inappropriate about a prophet, you can be killed. There are apostasy laws. If you convert to another religion, you can be killed. There are all of these methodologies to try and keep people within the religion that is prevalent within that society, within that area, within that country, and to keep them controlled by the hierarchy that controls the religion. We have to understand that being controlled in ritual, being held in place by outward religious observances, and the belief system that that external religious observances complete our obligation to reality, is a kind of torpor, a kind of hypnotism, a kind of robotism that takes over us and doesn't allow us to understand truth. Sufism is an attempt to break through these kinds of understandings. Sufism will tell us, as Bawa has said to us, that in this life we have many lives. We are reborn many times. Every thought that we have is a rebirth. Every religious observance that we do is a rebirth. Every glance that we take is a rebirth. And we are constantly going through rebirths in this life. Now, when we pray in the kind of prayer that has a specific time and a specific place, each prayer is a rebirth. And what is it that we're trying to do? We're trying to end rebirths. We're trying to end being born again over and over and over. And how do you end the rebirths that occur in this life and in further lives? You end them by losing the attachments that the self has to anything and everything. And how do you lose them? You lose them in a number of ways. You give up your attachments to things. You give up your desire for things. You give up your need for things. And furthermore, you no longer have opinions. You're no longer involved in praise and blame. You've become inert to the world. You're no longer affected by the things in the world. And on top of the list is you've entered into constant prayer as opposed to intermediate prayer. You've entered into a prayer that never leaves you. You've entered into a prayer that is ongoing, that has no day and has no night, has no time, has no intervals, is constant, and you are constant with it. So that prayer and the relationship between yourself and God becomes at the foremost importance in existence, to the point where even while you're doing other things, this prayer doesn't stop. And this is the constant repetition of La ilaha illallah. As we go through our day, in whatever we do, La ilaha illallah keeps repeating itself within us. Now, that's one form of zikr. There are other forms of zikr. There are zikrs that attempt to lessen the influence of the of the elements upon our being, of the worldly qualities upon our being, to lessen the effect of illusion on our being. And these come in intervals. We'll do zikr for a period of time. then we'll stop and go on with our daily work. And the point being, inshallah, that God willing, that the influence of all of the external forces are lessened upon us. But if we are truly on this path, we have to go beyond the influence of external forces. We have to go beyond the torpor of religion. We have to go beyond the torpor that comes from external ritual practices. We have to go into the phase where our practice is constant and is internal and is unaffected by all of the externalities that surround us and that play with us through our life, where that torpor of our involvement with the world goes away. And all of the rebirths that come with that torpor of our involvement with the world goes away. Somehow, this has to happen. Somehow, we have to become secure enough in our belief in God, our belief in Allah, that we begin to realize that at the peak of this relationship between ourselves and Allah, nothing else is in between it. And we need to become truth. And the way we become truth is to learn who and what we are, and how we are, and where we're from. External religious observances don't take you to that place, because there is the I and what I am doing. It should become the I and how am I disappearing. So to get to the point of disappearing is another level of existence and another level of interaction with existence. Imagine when Allah created us, He created us as an example and in reality with everything that exists within the entire universe being within man. Now, that may be hard to conceptualize, but think of it like this. All of the elements that exist in all of creation also exist within you. All of the elements that exist in all of the Milky Ways, in all of the universes, also exist within you. The complexity of your internal organisms and the internal goings on inside your body are as complex as the sun and the moon and everything that's traveling around each other that we see in the stars. If we look at the complexity of each human being, we would realize that the complexity of the human being is as great as the complexity of all of the universes. Internally, we are incredibly complex, yet we are also creations of our Lord, and we were created in the same way that the stars and the moons and the planets and the universes were created. It all came from this same hand. It all came from the hand of the Creator, and it all came into being through His will. Now, in the final understanding, the mystics explain that only God exists. And we, as Rumi said, are not a drop from the ocean, but the entire ocean in a drop. All of it is here. All of it is in us. And we have to be able to accept that reality. We have to be able to accept the reality that we are existence and somehow become large enough to be able to encompass existence, as opposed to seeing ourselves as tiny and small and insignificant and of no value. You see, within each of us is all that there is, and that's the way we were created. And we have all heard that. We've all heard that the way we were created was that everything is within us, and Allah made it that way. Yet we can't believe that. We can't understand that. But if we can get quiet enough to let go of everything that we hold on to, we can feel ourselves being part of all and everything that surrounds us. But to do that, we have to become very quiet. And we have to be able to let go of all of the fears that hold us in place. We have to let go of all of the things that keep us from breaking free. Bawa once said to us, you cannot reach God by either growing or shaving your hair. And I remember seeing a show on Hasidic Jews who had left the fold. And Hasidic Jews don't cut a certain portion of their hair right over the ear, and they let it grow. They call it a payas. It's a forelock that grows for length. And they were speaking to one of these men who had left the fold. And he was wearing a hat, and his hair looked, under the hat at least, normal. He took his hat off, and it still looked normal. Then he said, you know, and he pulled the forelock out from behind him that he had combed back. And he said, I'm terrified to cut this. I think I'll go directly to hell if I cut this hair. And that's why I still carry it, even though I'm totally secular now. I'm just terrified. Well, each of us are held in place by our fears. Each of us are held in place by our view of religion and the conception that we've given to it and the things that we need to do. When the truth comes and the truth is exposed, it can do a number of different things to you. It can make you run from it. It can make you hide from it. Or it can loosen you up and allow you to become free of all of the things that bind you so that you can begin to understand reality. Different people react differently. The truth is not for everybody, nor can everybody accept the truth. Some people are very, very happy with what they've been told up to now and are not interested at all in any change. Often, when the prophet went among new people, their response to him was, what do we need you for? We already have the belief systems of our ancestors and what they've taught us, and that's good enough for us. And why do people react like that? Because They have separated themselves into clans and groups and different uh, families, and they have concluded that they know what's right, and they've separated themselves from everybody else who doesn't know what's right. So since they are so convinced that they know what's right, when someone comes and tells them something different, it is a great threat to their being. It is a great threat to all of their ideas. It's a great threat to everything that they know. But if they truly did know what was going on, there wouldn't be threats, because their way would be so strong that would be able to see what somebody else said and see the truth in it. It wouldn't change or alter them in a bad way. It would only bring about something that was better, because they were moving in an appropriate direction. There are lots of stories that try to explain how the good, if it's truly good, will overcome anything that isn't appropriate, and what isn't appropriate will fall in line with that which is good. The Buddha would travel during certain seasons of the year with his disciples. And during these travels, they would go from village to village, and sometimes the weather wasn't suitable for living outside. So when they would get to a new village, all of the disciples would be told to find a home to stay in. And the rule was you could only stay for 3 days, because it was too much of an imposition, and they would move on. But they would stay, and they would stay for up to 3 days. So they were in a village, and they were looking for places to stay. And one of the disciples was invited to stay with a woman. And it turns out that she was a prostitute. And the disciple of the Buddha said, before I stay with you, I have to ask the Buddha. It has nothing to do with you. It just has to do that we have to ask him before we can stay. So when he went to ask the Buddha if he could stay with him, with this woman, the people from the town were there, and they said, she's a prostitute. He can't stay with her. And the Buddha said, if she wants him to stay so badly with her, why shouldn't he stay? And if the way that I teach is appropriate, and if the path that I'm taking you on is the right path, why would you be afraid to stay with her? Wouldn't what I've taught you be sufficient to maintain you in the state that you're in? Go stay with her. So he stayed with her. And she played music for him. And the people in the town heard the music. And they all came screaming to the Buddha, it's over for him. He's done. And then she danced for him. And they saw the shadows of her dancing. And they ran to the Buddha and said, it's over for him. He's done. And so on for the 3 days that he was with her. And the third day, when it was time to leave, the disciple returned with a female monk. The alteration had occurred, but not in the way the villagers thought it was going to occur. She had become one of them. And if truth comes, that's the effect that it will have. It will bring you into truth, not push you away from truth. It will protect you from that which isn't true and bring you into Hak, into reality. So each of us has to know that what's going on as far as reality is concerned is an internal process. And whatever goes on the outside is not necessarily what's going on the inside. And external performances and external ritual practices will only take you so far. Bawa used the phrase, it's like for those things you will be paid wages. But we need to go beyond working for wages. We need to go to the love for the truth and the love for reality. So we need to pull this tooth that is attached to the lower self and be rid of the lower self. But of course, we have to know why that tooth is being pulled and what is the function of that pulling of that tooth. But for people who are involved in external rituals, they'll go around pulling the tooth and that'll be the end of it. Well, my tooth is gone. I'm free now. I'm like the holy man. Well, you're not like the holy man. The truth is that the tooth is just a symbol of what's going on inside. So we need to be aware that we need to be pure internally. And we have to work towards that internal purity. We have to work towards relieving ourselves of our attachments to the world, and we have to relieve ourselves of the torpor that those attachments put us in. We have to somehow become free and released from all of the things that hold us in place and stop us from understanding truth. So we have to practice leaving this world. We have to practice sitting still and leaving this world, leaving our thoughts of it, leaving our ideas of it, giving up all of the things that make us who we are prior to becoming a non-being in the sense of an all-being. The difference between the I and everything is very close. Allah, who is everything, is right on our shoulder. And we can either go with him or hold on to this body as if this body represented humanity, as if this body represented who we are, as if this body had importance and was eternal. And in truth, it disappears. In truth, it has no eternality. And if we want to find that place, which is eternal, we have to learn to give up our obsession with ourself, or as Rumi says, unself yourself. And this is the path that is real. This is the path that we've chosen because we have an internal affinity to the understanding of the reality of it. Even though we can't explain it because words are limited, we know the reality of it. We know that that's the truth. And now what we have to do is accomplish what we internally know and internally feel is the truth. There's no ranting and raving. There's no differences. There's no separations. There's just God. And we're part of that. And we disappear into that. And we continue to work towards that end. The constant repetition of La ilaha illallah in everything that we do, in everything that we say, in every movement that we make, is our goal. That is the prayer that is without limit. That is the prayer that is without day or night. That is the prayer that is without separation and without time parameters. That's an ongoing reality. May it become so that we enter into that reality, that we enter into that space that is without limit. May Allah allow that to happen for each of us. Ameen. Ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.